Now, this week, Germaine Greer celebrated her 80th birthday, arguably the most influential feminist of her generation in Britain. Now she is perhaps more famous for upsetting today's feminists. Last year, while acknowledging that some rapes are spectacularly violent crimes, she said others could be thought of as non-consensual, that is, bad sex. She called the Me Too movement whinging because it counted girls spreading their legs to get an offer of a movie role as the same thing as non-consensual sex. Well, 3 years ago, students tried to stop her from speaking at Cardiff University because of what they dubbed her transphobic views against men who had transitioned to being female. Greer does not regard them as being women. She's not the only former heroine of the feminism movement to now be regarded as beyond the pale. So is feminism in crisis? Dr. Sheila Jeffreys, author of The Industrial Vagina. Germaine Greer, was she ever a feminist icon?
I think Germaine Greer has been much attacked and pilloried because there is not respect for old women intellectuals in the way that there is for men. She's made a hugely important contribution to feminism, but it was an intellectual contribution. She was never really making the posters in the campaign groups. And so she's not always been plugged into what are feminists and women thinking at a particular point in time.
So those views don't necessarily represent mainstream feminism.
They don't.
Today.
But I think in terms of its feminism in crisis, feminism is doing hugely better now than it has for a very long time. There was more than a decade when feminism was so completely in the doldrums, it was almost invisible. And we're at a watershed moment. We're at a watershed moment in two ways, obviously the Me Too movement, but also in terms of feminist anger, the fury of women that is rising around the issue of transgender rights as they realise that a lot of their gains are now being subjected to men who cross-dress, wanting to enter their spaces and even speaking for feminism in some ways.
Well, that is just one dividing line. There are many dividing lines, it would seem, within the feminism debate. And you hinted as well, that kind of intergenerational one. Do you think young women's experience these days is very different? There may be young women who describe themselves as feminists, but hold quite different views to perhaps you.
I think young women these days actually have a much more difficult experience in relation to male violence than I ever did in terms of whether they're able to go to clubs and what happens to them and so on. So they're in a crisis situation in a sense in terms of their experience of male violence. But the problem is, in the last few decades, the universities that many of them have gone to have been absolutely dominated by a sort of queer theory, postmodern feminism, which says there can be many genders and sex is socially constructed, which has been an inoculation against feminism, if you like. And maybe some of them have bought the idea that actually women have got lots and they don't need very much more at the moment, so why is feminism necessary? So it's possible that women in their young 20s actually find all of the really serious issues of feminism that are passing over their heads at the moment.
I wonder, let me come to you, Linda Riley, Diva magazine. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a danger that, as Sheila describes, feminism is in some way being diluted because of all the different issues it's being asked to embrace?
Well, I think that with feminism, it's got a huge problem. I think the question is not, is feminism in crisis? It's why is it in crisis? Because it definitely is. It's not inclusive. As Sheila Jeffreys said just there, it doesn't include the trans community, particularly it doesn't include the working class community. It's not in touch with the working classes. Most of the working classes don't feel included. From my experience, the feminists, the intellectual feminists, they're talking a language that people don't understand.
So for too long it's been a kind of white middle class driven issue.
Not only that, I mean, for too long it's continuing to be. The best statement I saw was 2 weeks ago, Sophie Walker at the Women's Equality Party. She resigned and she said, I want to give this position to a person of colour or working class person, and that's what a lot of the feminists need to do, is let the working classes speak.
Yeah. I'll come to you in a moment, Max. If I can come to Dr. Finn Mackay, author of Radical Feminism, Feminist Activism in Movement. Do you recognise the description that we've seen either from Sheila or from Linda?
Well, there are differences within feminism because there are differences between women. Women are not a homogenous group. We don't get some party line down so that we agree on every issue. And I don't think we would expect that of other groups. You know, the Tories at the moment can't even agree who they want to be their own Prime Minister. And we're expecting everyone who identifies as a feminist to share the same line on exactly every issue.
To be fair, you see divisions within every political party. I'm not sure it's exclusive to just one.
Exactly. But there's a lot of... Feminism is held to a very high standard and it is scrutinised. And if anything, the fact that feminism has always reflected on power relationships between women and addressed those, and to say that feminism has always been white and middle class and educated is also to hide and invisibilise all the work that working class feminists did at the beginning. It grew out of women's groups and women's self-organisation, the contribution of black feminist thought, black feminist scholarship, lesbian feminist scholarship. So those women have also been there from the beginning and have constructed and built the movement that we have now. And when we take this narrative that the media does love to suggest as well, that it is a certain very narrow way, we hide all the contributions from those other people. And also it's not a generational issue. People differ in politics. But when again we take this line that it's some sort of generational catfight, that is an insult to all the girls and young women around this country who are setting up feminist societies in their own schools, in their own colleges, who are organising online, who are setting up their own campaigns. They're doing politics. It might not look like Westminster politics, but that's been the case for a long time. But they are there. So I think feminism isn't in crisis because I think feminism is working.
I feel somewhat offended by the comment that men are speaking for feminism, as you said. I feel that I'm quite a strong...
You're not doing that right now.
Well, no, but it was said...
Yeah, be quiet, Max.
Exactly. It was said a second ago that we're now in a situation where men are speaking for feminism. I feel that, as a feminist, that I feel very strongly that I should be allowed to be a voice for feminism. And there was a story about somebody of Andrea Dawkins, who was a very radical feminist, went along to a feminist gathering and was excluded for much the reasons you're talking about because people said that she was too old. And so I think feminists are starting to exclude voices that would, and traditionally, like myself, would support feminism. I'm being told because I'm a man,
I think that's exactly why we're asking the question. So,
but there's a huge pro-feminist men's movement at the moment, and we're having national conversations about masculinity, the harms of masculinity. We're going for a new wave of men and male scholars speaking out about the harms of masculinity.
Even a shaving company's cops
well,
onto that.
Absolutely.
And so Max says he's a feminist. I wonder how many people here, because it's fascinating that actually fewer women than you would think describe themselves as feminists. Perhaps who here would describe themselves, and I asked this of all the audience, who here would describe themselves as a feminist? Raise your hands. Right, OK, so that's more than the general population. One of the statistics I have here, that in a survey in 2017, only 46% of women identified themselves as feminists. So raise your hands again. Let me just ask, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you to be a feminist?
It means having the same opportunities that any man would have, I think, in a sense.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, to the lady here.
It's about intersectionality. It's about understanding that whilst we're different, those differences shouldn't keep us apart or mean that we have more opportunities. And I think it's about talking about that and being inclusive. I think the issue is a lot of older feminists and have had to fight against different problems. So today, we are, as a intersectional feminist, I want everyone to have the same rights as I do. And, you know, not many of my black friends will say they're a feminist because they're scared of the word.
Yeah. Intersectional feminism. This is feminism that crosses different lines.
Yeah, exactly.
You describe it for us.
So, for me, intersectional feminism is recognising that regardless of your race, your religion, your political affiliation, that you should have the right to live in this world freely without fear of persecution and fear of assault. And I think that's something that I advocate at the University of Brighton Feminist Society, where I'm president. And it's very inclusive, and it's a message that I want to get out there. Like, feminism isn't just for women, it's for men, it's for trans men, it's for trans women.
It's not gender anymore.
It's not. It's about colour.
That's the
key
message that I think a lot of the traditional feminists are
don't
still
want to
hung
hear.
up on, in my humble opinion.
I think we shouldn't use terms like traditional feminists. I mean, that we're doing the same homogenising thing.
We are.
There are many different schools of feminism.
Yes.
Sheila Jeffries and I have known each other way back in 40 years ago. And at that time, there were huge debates about where we should be,
But
what
you
we
wouldn't
should be
disagree
doing.
that it's
Hold on.
roots line feminine
There are
thought.
lots rather not be interrupted. There are lots of different ways of expressing, but we have a problem that we do tend to homogenise. And so we tend to say, this is the way it should be, and exclude other voices. Yeah. And I know that in the early 80s, I, as a Jewish woman and as a lesbian, needed to express those things, and found that actually people who wanted to make it a narrow path made me feel that I couldn't be part of it. And it's a very dangerous thing. I wouldn't say that feminism is in crisis, because, you know, my niece is a feminist, as we've just seen this audience. Actually, in the 1990s, nobody was a feminist. Suddenly, everybody's wanting to claim it. I think that's great. It's not in crisis.
Rabbi Ellie Sarah, so, and you would describe yourself as genderqueer, as non-binary, but you feel that there is absolutely a space for that, for the entire spectrum within feminism.
There absolutely is. The important thing is, to me, the enemy is, I'm going to use an old-fashioned word, patriarchy. It's male power that's the problem. And everybody is demonised if they don't actually acknowledge that that is the issue.
But
I'm in solidarity with a trans woman.
But is that demonising men? Is that demonising men, Belinda Brown?
I think that this idea of patriarchy you're presenting is completely mythical. I mean, the reason why so many people feel excluded from feminism, I mean, if you were able to include, you know, more working class, more different ethnic minority groups, they wouldn't be interested in the same issues as Sophie Walker. They'd be saying, please, can you make sure that our boys are getting through school? Can you get our boys, our sons into university? Can you make sure that our sons can father their own children and be with them? You know, that's why, because the issues they'd be interested in for their sons, and feminism just can't.
Feminism is about supporting
what they would be interested in if they're not given that voice anyway.
Exactly.
You're literally speaking for
and
a
also
whole other people.
Hang on, let's just hear, as well. Let's hear from Sue.
Yes.
You're literally speaking for people who are not inclusive, and they are actively discluded from this movement. And unfortunately, there's only certain voices that are being heard, and other people are being drowned out. And a debate that is encouraged by the media is being reduced down to people's right to exist as a human being. We should never be debating that.
Who's being drowned out, Sue?
There are people who are trans, non-binary, genderqueer, gender non-conforming are being drowned out of, they are being removed from the feminist argument and debate. And it's become taken over by people who are very radical and who do not want them in their spaces, when they don't realise that those people themselves are the ones that are in danger in those spaces and are dealing with daily harassment and abuse. That is a lived experience.
Bernadette Raggett, a motivational speaker from the Restore Support Network. Is the balance right?
I think we're getting there. I mean, I speak to females in prisons, out of prisons, any way you want to speak to them, one-to-ones. And with regards to what you just said, I think that's an absolute insult. Please don't speak on my behalf and my people. Having said that, as the lady behind me quite rightly said, we'd like to be included in some of these clubs, but they're excluding us. So I
How are you being excluded?
Well, you know, it is generally upper middle class people in these kind of echelons. Even if you go back to times began, yes, there were lower class and working class people, but they're not. There's no statues around with them in it. So no, actually, you know, I'm sorry. So I don't really want to be put in that box. I think feminism, we're not in crisis, we're getting there. Black, white, transgender, we're getting there. But my concern is, whilst we get to the top of the mountain, be careful that we're not excluding and alienating guys, young boys and men.
Well, the irony is, I just want to go to Jane. Jane Fay, you've experienced life as a man and as a woman, and
I'm not going to go into. I'm not going to go down that road.
You've been a feminist throughout your life. Is that fair to say?
Pretty much, yes. But expressed differently, because we'll have different experiences.
Yeah.
And that is part of what's going on. The generic comment I'd make is, no, it's not any more in crisis than it has been for its last 40, 50, 60 years. This is just a media obsession. Every now and then it goes, oh, it's in crisis, and let's have a big questions programme.
Well, now, hang on a second. Hang on. Hear the different range of voices here, all of whom are brilliantly articulate and have a wealth of experience.
They are. Can I say, there are two things going on here, one of which is that there seems to be almost a battle between those who say there is a single voice and are wanting to talk over everyone else, and those who say there are very diverse voices, and there's places I will not go because I have no background or experience to talk over them. Where I will say there is a crisis, let me just extend this a tiny bit, because I write a great deal about what goes on in Europe. I write about Italy. In Italy, what we are seeing is right-wing and far-right now colonising the language of feminism. We're seeing La Lega up in the north talking about protecting women. What they mean is absolutely out there, protecting Italian women against migrants, and it becomes a racist narrative. And then the thing which is also different in Italy, and which I love about Italy and why I want to go and live in Bologna, is that everybody is fighting back together. Non Una di Meno is a women's movement which allies with LGBT, which allies with migrants, and it's everyone together.
But isn't that, in a sense, feminism having to take on too many causes and do the work of other, perhaps, issues where race may be the issue, social inequality may be the issue?
Can I just say, my definition of a feminist is somebody who stands up for the person that needs standing up for.
Yes.
And in a lot of instances...
But that's asking an awful lot of women, isn't it?
No, but I think particularly in the field of mental health, which is my field, the patriarchy, the definition of masculinity as stoic, as somebody who's not allowed to express themselves emotionally, is harming young men and harming their mental health. It is the job of people who don't subscribe to the patriarchy to stand up for everybody who is damaged by it. And there are more people being damaged by patriarchy than benefit from it. And so we need more than ever to be united.
You have to look at some of the old classic feminist texts from people like Andrea Dworkin. Andrea Dworkin famously said, feminists are not feminists because they hate men, they're feminists because they believe in men's humanity, against sometimes the evidence to the contrary. You look at writers like Susan Brown-Miller, Lynn Segal, these early feminists writing about masculinity, talking about the rights of boys and young men. In fact, some people would say that surely it is feminists who have most faith and belief in men, because we don't take this boys will be boys, all boys are toilet-trained gorillas, they're naturally going to go out and rape people, they can't hold a pen long enough to write their own name. And as the mother of a son, that is absolute rubbish. And I want my child, who happens to be male, to grow up with the full gamut of compassion and love that he deserves, that all men want to give love, receive love, be cared for in a community. And feminism, since the 70s, has written that down.
One moment, Max, if you could, just one moment, Belinda. I want to go back to Sheila, and then I do want to hear from our audience.
Feminism isn't about men, it's not about everybody, it is about women, it's about white women and black women and disabled women and so on, but it's about women. Now, fundamental to feminism is the acknowledgement that it's extremely dangerous for women to even exist in this society, right? Men can't speak for feminism because they're not looking in the backseat of the car with the keys between their fingers because they think they're going to get attacked by women.
Men are more likely to be victims of violent crime.
Oh, that's absolutely, but from men. So girls, the studies of teenage girls show that they're all concerned about sexual harassment. It's a huge issue for them. This means they don't even have the freedom to walk on the streets that boys and men have. Fundamental to feminism is the violence that women and girls receive.
Let's hear from this young male, then. Do you understand what Sheila's saying?
No. Why do we seldom hear feminists talking up for issues in society that negatively affect men? Why is it so focused all the time on females? Because the problem with that, men build up 50% of society. Of course it involves us. Yeah. We are part of it. And if we, things like, if you watch a TV soap, a soap on TV, EastEnders or something, and a man slaps a woman, it's dreadful, and it's seen as, the audience will be shocked. The other way around, a woman slapping a man, it's almost a bit of fun. And if feminists believe in gender equality, that should be as much of an issue for them as the issues that affect women negatively.
OK, let's hear from the gentleman next to you, and then I'll come back on those points.
Yeah, this has become a very esoteric and emotional debate. Let's try and look at some practical issues. I was an active trade unionist for a long, long time. Back in 1990, I worked in a big multinational company, and it was obvious to me that women were being underpaid. And I organised a pay survey. And
did the women not realise this themselves?
They did, but I was a trade union representative and I could actually take the issue up, and that's what I did. And I discovered that there was something like a 20% pay differential. Now, bear in mind...
When was this?
This was 1990.
Right.
OK. The Equal Pay Act was passed in 1970. And look at where we're at now. The BBC, look at their response to the equal pay issue. What did they do? They sought to level downwards. Now, if feminism is really working, Why is this still the case?
Yes, and that's, you make a very good point in many ways, but also, what are the issues that women should be fighting for today? Yeah. Where does feminine has its fight? If it's not within itself, where should feminism be fighting? Yes, to the lady, sorry, to the lady just behind you first.
I was just going to say, adding on to your point, I think the big I think saying feminism in crisis is implying that it's out of control, and I don't think it is. I think the main issue is that there's kind of a stigma about feminists that they're men haters, that it's excluding men, it's about women's rights only. I think feminism is completely not that. I think it's about equality, and I think because there's become this stigma and this kind of misconception of feminism as hating men, that's where the problem arises. So I think we need to address that and then continue if we want to get it successfully.
OK. I want to talk to Stacey now. I think we'll all be interested to hear from Stacey. Stacey, you describe yourself as an ethical stripper.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's a title I've chosen because I wanted to think of the ways that sex work and stripping could be spoken about away from the morals of it, and bring in this kind of idea of ethics in terms of best practice, policy, who gets to make the decisions about how it's done. And my experience so far in 12 years has been that it's decided for above our heads. So as a sex worker, I find myself kind of being told how I can and can't work. And that's
Who's telling you?
Oh, state legislation, which often is really poorly thought out and lets us down. I mean, the question of is feminism in crisis? For me, I think we've, like, you know, it's like some of the speakers have been saying, it's a really dynamic, exciting movement at the moment, but I'd like to see 21st century feminism update its agenda to include people who work in the sex industry, who consent to sexual labour, and who are often very much left out of this conversation
that's a really,
as well.
that's a really interesting point, consent to sexual labour.
Yeah.
It's a very fine line. It may be that you, in your situation, are fully in control and able to consent, but that certainly wouldn't be the case for every woman in the sex
If you're going to
industry.
go down the road of saying that there are people who are empowered and people who are not, that's a very, very simplified, reductive kind of argument.
Okay.
It's
How
actually
would you
far
put
more
it?
nuanced. It's more complex. So there's a range of experience, and very often sex workers make choices within a limited set of choices, but that doesn't mean to say that they don't still have choice and have any agency at all.
Do you feel exploited?
For sure. I mean, I've worked in strip clubs for 12 years, and the model of a strip club is highly exploitative. Most sex work is exploitative in its kind of format, like in terms of the economics of it. But that's something we need to change from within. We certainly don't solve the problem by making it invisible,
But you think
by criminalising it, and by shutting...
It's a legitimate profession for women to go into.
It's a job where, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only person in the audience who's read the report by the Women's Budget Group that has pointed out that between 2010 and 2020, 86% of austerity cuts affect women hardest. And that is one of the motivations for people entering the industry. But so we need to look at actually the
But that shouldn't necessarily be driving women into sex work.
But it's an economic reality that creates a reality. That's what people are doing, and we shouldn't be punished for that. So criminalising the industry, shutting strip clubs down, campaigning to get clubs shut down when you've got no experience of being within the industry. To me, that's feminism in crisis, because you're removing choices.
Removing choices from women, Sheila.
I agree. The fact is the sex industry is absolutely sexed. It's not men in the strip clubs getting women to look into their anuses and giving them bits of money. So it's actually based upon the subordination of women. It's based on the sexualised subordination of women. Of course, there are many women who want to go into this because it's very, very difficult to earn decent money. That doesn't mean that they consent to it. The need for money is a force. It is a power that forces people to do certain things. But certainly the sex industry, I understand to be about men's violence against women. It's just one kind. So watching women stripping, going and using women in prostitution, these are forms of men's violence in an equal world. This is one reason we don't want equality, because we actually don't want strip clubs full of men, and it's not going to happen anyway, who are actually stripping and getting women to look up their anuses. This is not the vision we want. We want to get rid of men's power.
That's an image I've had twice in my head now. Probably twice too many, but that's fine.
nice.
Well, that's good, actually. That's
highly effective.
But the sex industry can't replace the welfare state, and we are sitting back watching our welfare state being eroded. And you know, the sex industry is not some charity that's coming in for young student women going, oh, let's help you through your education. You know, it's not a charity. It's out for itself to make as much money as it can, and that's what it is the world over. The answer to that is to bring back the student grant, to scrap fees, to protect the welfare state.
Well, I was expecting that to go down well in a university building here in Brighton as well. You're right. Listen, where is the fight now then? If feminism, we can't quite agree whether it's in crisis or not, where does the fight go to?
I say that feminism is supposed to be about preventing any groups from being excluded. I think it should have and has moved away from being about gender and is about focusing on people that are excluded and not empowered in society, like we've heard from
Jane.
I would go way beyond that. It's not about where people are excluded, it's where people are being exploited. And what I cannot get is this obsession with, oh, strip clubs, sex work, bad. One of the most exploited groups going on. When you sit down and watch Wimbledon and eat your strawberries, look on the label where they come from. If they come from the Mediterranean, that comes from an industry where women are employed because women are better at picking fruit and are abused and sexually abused to keep the wages down.
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing at the moment is allowing women who have, young women who are at universities, to empower other women and educate them and to change their minds. Because it's not, we don't have the same struggles as before. It's about changing what needs to be said about sex workers, about men, about trans people. That's the big crisis. Nobody's listening to us. People are still listening to old narratives.
The young man behind you.
I think in terms of, I don't think feminism is a crisis, but I don't think it's fair to say that it should be focused on one specific area or should be fighting one specific cause. If only because feminism is always going to be a slightly divided group, and that's just the nature of it.
Thank you very, very much, all of you. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, quite rightly one, with so much passion for the future of our daughters and our sons, I hope. Thank you so much to all of you for contributing today. As always, the debate will continue online and on Twitter. Next week, Big Questions is in Newport. Do join Nikki then. For now, it's goodbye from me. Have a great Sunday. Thank you.